The sun was setting on Kalrath for the 37th time since the enemy arrived. Elder Torvin stood on the broken wall with both forearms hanging at his sides, too tired to pretend they still belonged to a leader. Below him, the old shield shimmered in weak blue pulses over the fortress, flaring every time another Vrain cannon struck it from the plains. Each impact rolled through the stone beneath his feet. Each impact told the same truth. The shield was dying, and when it died, so would the 3,000 souls hiding in the caves below. Behind him, Kalrath waited in silence that was somehow louder than the bombardment. Families crowded the old tunnels with blankets, ration tins, and the last of their water. Farmers who had spent their whole lives turning hard soil into food now sat with empty hands. Miners who had learned how to split rock with patience and precision listened to artillery tear their world apart and knew none of their skill mattered here. Mothers held children close enough to hurt. The old whispered prayers. The young tried to look brave for everyone else. Nobody talked about tomorrow anymore. Tomorrow had become a cruel joke the siege kept repeating. Torvin had lived a long life on a peaceful world. He had watched crops fail and bloom again. He had settled disputes over land, water, and marriage bonds. He had buried friends, welcomed grandchildren, and believed, with the quiet arrogance of the fortunate, that history's worst storms happened to other people. Then the sky had darkened in a single morning. He still remembered that first day too clearly. Children had been playing in the western fields when shadows passed over them. The airship. Black ships descended through the clouds like metal predators blotting out the sun. Then the voice came across every channel on the colony, amplified until it seemed to crawl through the stones themselves. Thrauz, commander of the Vrain, had announced that Kalrath now belonged to the Dominion. Surrender or die, he had said, with the calm certainty of a creature describing weather. They had run to the fortress because their ancestors had built it during some old age of fear no one in Torvin's generation had taken seriously. Strong walls. Deep caves. Emergency stores. Ancient shields. Relics, all of it. Relics that had somehow kept them alive for 37 impossible days. Captain Zalith climbed the steps to the wall and stopped beside him. He was younger by decades, broad-shouldered, bright green-skinned, once known for a laugh that could fill a room. That laugh was gone now. His eyes had the flat look of someone who had been forced to count death too many times. The shields are failing, Zalith said quietly. Maybe 1 hour. Torvin nodded once. He appreciated that the captain no longer wrapped bad news in hopeful language. Hope had been expensive here. They had spent almost all of it. Below the wall, another Vrain war machine fired. Blue light splashed across the fortress barrier. The shield flickered, thinned, recovered, then dimmed to a weak, trembling skin. They are not even rushing anymore, Zalith said. They know they have won. Torvin looked out across the plains. Thousands of Vrain soldiers waited beyond the bombardment line, armored shapes moving through smoke and dust. Their camps spread like a stain around the colony. Their transports crouched on the ground like feeding beasts. The enemy had 15,000 warriors, armor, artillery, orbiting support, and all the time in the world. Kalrath had 20 guards with old rifles, a failing shield, and prayers that were starting to sound embarrassed. Should we surrender? Zalith asked at last. Torvin did not answer immediately. That was the question every parent in the caves wanted someone else to ask. Maybe if they opened the gates, maybe if they knelt, maybe if they begged hard enough, the children would be spared. But they both knew the stories. The Vrain did not leave survivors because mercy weakened the lesson. Colonies that surrendered vanished into slave markets and execution pits. Adults were worked to death. Children were sold, trained, broken, or hunted for amusement by officers who called it sport. Thrauz had conquered 17 colonies. He was not here for land. He was here for ownership. No, Torvin said. Surrender only changes the shape of death. For a moment, neither of them spoke. 37 days earlier, they had sent distress calls to everyone. Neighboring systems. Trade partners. Council relays. Anyone with a ship, a conscience, or enough fuel to cross the dark. The answers had come slowly, then stopped completely. A nearby colony apologized and said they could not survive Vrain retaliation. A merchant guild said the route was too dangerous. Then the Galactic Council had answered at last with cold, perfect language that somehow made the cruelty worse. Kalrath was too remote. Intervention would cost too much. Resources had to be allocated rationally. 3,000 lives were not worth the price of rescue. The math did not work. Torvin had read that message 3 times before deleting it. Not because he misunderstood it. Because some part of him had needed to watch hope die honestly. Behind them, deep inside the fortress, the old communication station gave a sudden sharp tone. Torvin turned. No one on Kalrath had heard that sound in 37 days. Vera stared at the console as if fear alone might turn the signal back into silence. For 37 days the old communications array had done nothing except hiss, crackle, and mock her loyalty. She had sat through every shift with tired eyes and dry hands, watching static crawl across dead channels while outside the sky burned and the shield grew weaker. She had learned the shape of disappointment so well that when the alert tone finally cut through the room, her first thought was that something had broken. Then she saw the readings. A contact had appeared at the edge of the system. Not drifting. Not blinking in and out like debris. Moving. Fast. Her 3 eyes widened as more lights populated the tactical display one after another, each tagged with energy levels so high her screen struggled to process them. The system tried to classify the signatures, failed, then failed again. Unknown propulsion. Unknown power curve. Unknown hull profiles. The database did not even know what category to guess. Elder Torvin, she shouted, her voice cracking. Captain Zalith, come quickly. They came down the stone steps faster than either of them had moved in days. Torvin gripped the doorway to steady himself before crossing the room. Zalith reached the console first, one hand already resting near the emergency shutoff as if bad news might become less real if he could silence it. What is it? Torvin asked. Vera swallowed and forced her fingers to stay steady on the controls. Something just entered the system. Large energy readings. Very large. Multiple contacts. They're closing fast. Zalith's face hardened at once. Hope did not even get the chance to live. Vrain reinforcements. That was my first thought too, Vera said quickly. But the signatures don't match. Not Vrain engines. Not council patterns. Not trade vessels. Not anything in the database. Torvin leaned closer. The old leader had never understood ship systems, but even he could read the numbers flooding the display. The contacts were too powerful, too organized, too fast for chance. Unknown, he said. Vera nodded. Every species in this region was supposed to be known. The council bragged about that constantly. Registered trade lanes, mapped borders, cataloged military tonnage, indexed fleet signatures, diplomatic files stacked so high they could bury a world in paperwork. Nothing moved in civilized space without entering the record eventually. That was the promise. Yet something was coming now that the record could not name. Outside the fortress, on the opposite side of the siege lines, Commander Throuse received the same alert. He stood inside his field command post wrapped in heavy armor that made him look even larger than he was. Thick plates covered his chest and shoulders. His jaw was lined with old scars from victories he treated like decorations. He had been growing impatient. The siege had stopped being fun days ago. Kelrath was beaten. The colonists knew it. His troops knew it. The only thing left was choosing how much fear to carve into the final hour. When the shields fall, he had just told his second, kill the adults first. Keep the young alive where possible. Fear sells better when it starts early. His tactical officer interrupted him with visible hesitation. Commander, we are detecting multiple contacts entering the system. Throuse barely looked up. Our reinforcements? No, sir. Unknown signatures. That made him move. He crossed to the display and watched the approaching marks cut toward Kelrath with startling speed. His first emotion was irritation. Then, beneath it, a smaller feeling he had not expected to taste here. Uncertainty. Open challenge channels, he ordered. Broadcast Dominion claim authority. Demand identification. The signals went out. No answer came back. On the fortress wall, the colonists had begun to gather again, drawn by rumor before facts. Siege life had sharpened everyone's hearing for the sound of possibility. Torvin climbed back to the top and found the broken stones crowded with thin faces, frightened faces, faces trying not to hope too openly in case hope turned vengeful again. Children pointed upward. The evening sky was deepening toward black. For a breath it looked unchanged. Then someone shouted. Lights had appeared in the darkness where moments before there had only been stars. Small at first. Steady. Too deliberate to be meteors. Too many to be tricks of the eyes. Vera came running onto the wall carrying a portable scanner. They're slowing, she said breathless. Dropping from transit. I count 12 large ships. No, 15, wait, 20. More signatures behind them. The Vrain fleet in orbit reacted instantly. Across the sky, dark wedges shifted position. Attack screens formed. Weapon ports opened. The entire blockade pivoted away from the fortress and toward the newcomers. Torvin felt a strange flutter inside his chest, the old instinct his people spoke of in stories. The hidden organ that stirred when fate bent close. He had not felt it in years. Now it beat like trapped wings against his ribs. Warning signals flashed upward from the Vrain ships. Still the unknown fleet gave no reply. The first light came without sound from the ground. A hard white line crossed the heavens so fast Torvin almost thought he imagined it. Then one of the Vrain warships broke open in orbit. Fire bloomed across the sky. And every living soul on Kelrath realized at the same exact moment that whoever had come had not come to watch. The first Vrain warship died so fast it looked less like destruction and more like judgment. One moment it was there above Kelrath, a dark armored shape hanging over the planet with the confidence of an executioner. The next, a white beam ripped through its center and the ship opened like split metal fruit, fire bursting from its core before the pieces drifted apart in burning arcs across the sky. For half a second, no one on the ground moved. Then the heavens erupted. More beams flashed from the incoming fleet. Missiles streaked through orbit like comets with purpose. The Vrain ships fired back in a storm of plasma and interceptor bursts, but the newcomers moved through the barrage with impossible control. They did not advance in rigid lines the way most fleets did. They curved, rolled, scattered, and converged again like predators hunting by instinct and mathematics at the same time. Every movement seemed reckless until it ended in perfect position for a killing shot. Another Vrain cruiser vanished in a bloom of blue fire. Then another. On the fortress wall, colonists stared upward with open mouths and wet eyes, every face lit by war happening far above them. For 37 days the sky had been a ceiling pressing them toward death. Now it had become something else entirely. A battlefield. A promise. A door. Captain Zalith checked his scanner twice because his mind refused the first answer. Their fleet is collapsing, he whispered. The blockade is actually collapsing. Torvin said nothing. He could not. His throat had closed around something too sharp to swallow. In orbit, Commander Thrauz watched his victory disappear in under 3 minutes. The command deck of his flagship shook as nearby vessels died one by one. Warnings screamed across every display. Formation integrity lost. Shield failures. Reactor breaches. Interceptor losses. Weapons offline. Communications flooded with panicked reports from captains who, moments earlier, had been discussing how to divide the spoils of Kelrath. What are these ships? Thrauz roared. No one answered him because no one knew. His tactical officers' hands shook over the console. They are targeting our heavy assets first. Precision strikes. Their missile guidance is adapting in real time. Commander, they are inside our firing solutions before our computers can lock them. A second officer turned from the comm station, face pale beneath scaled skin. Incoming transmission, audio only. Play it. Static cracked across the bridge. Then a voice came through, male, deep, controlled, carrying anger so disciplined it sounded colder than rage. Vrain forces, this is Captain Ryan Cooper of the Earth Defense Force carrier Valiant. Thrauz frowned. Earth meant nothing to him. No name in the sector. No listed power. No council mark. No history. The unknown had just spoken and somehow that made it worse. The voice continued. You are hereby ordered to cease all hostile actions against the colony of Kelrath immediately. Surrender now or be destroyed. The words went out not just to the Vrain. They echoed through open frequencies, through emergency relays, through half-broken receivers in the fortress below. Torvin heard them standing on his wall. Vera heard them with both hands pressed over her mouth. Mothers in the caves heard them. Wounded guards heard them. Children heard them without fully understanding the words and still knew, somehow, that something impossible had entered the story. Someone had come. After 37 days of silence, after the council's cold arithmetic, after neighboring worlds looked away and left them to become a lesson, someone had crossed the stars and said no. Torvin felt tears spill down his face before he realized he was crying. On the Vrain flagship, Thrauz bared his teeth. Open return channel. His officer complied. This world belongs to the Dominion, Thrauz snarled into the transmitter. Withdraw now or be marked hostile. There was no pause before the answer came. We received a distress call, Captain Cooper said. We heard people asking for help. We are here to answer that call. Any Vrain ship or soldier that does not withdraw will be treated as an enemy combatant. No speech. No negotiation. No ritual threats. Just a decision already made. Then the human fleet hit even harder. A Vrain battleship tried to break away toward high orbit. 3 incoming missiles altered course in perfect sync, punched through its engines and left it spinning dead. Another ship fired on the newcomers and was cut apart by crossing beams before its second volley charged. Escape routes vanished. Firing lanes collapsed. Every Vrain commander in orbit suddenly faced the same horrifying realization. The unknown species was not buying time. It was winning. Below, the bombardment around the fortress began to weaken as orbital coordination broke apart. Colonists lifted their heads. The air itself seemed to change. Fear was still there, but it was no longer alone. Then Vera looked up from her portable scanner and her voice came out almost as a gasp. There's more, she said. Torvin turned. Hundreds of new signals had separated from the human fleet and were plunging straight through the atmosphere toward the planet below. From the ground, the descending drop pods looked like a meteor storm aimed with intent. They tore through Kelrath's atmosphere in burning lines, hundreds of them punching down through the clouds and smoke with such speed that even the Vrain forgot the fortress for a moment and stared upward. The siege guns fell silent one by one, not because the enemy had chosen restraint, but because instinct had briefly replaced discipline. Something new was falling out of the sky, and every soldier on the plains understood the same thing. Whatever had come for orbit was now coming for them. The first pod hit beyond the eastern siege line with a detonation that threw dirt, metal, and Vrain bodies into the air. Then another struck near the artillery ridge. Then 6 more landed in a staggered line behind the main assault force, cutting the battlefield apart with impact craters and smoke. The earth shook beneath the fortress. Dust rolled across the plains in violent gray waves. For one stunned heartbeat, it looked as if the humans had chosen to bombard the enemy by dropping iron from the heavens. Then the pods opened. Armored figures emerged through the smoke. On the fortress wall, Captain Zalith raised his scanner with trembling hands. "Troops," he said. "A lot of troops." Vera checked the feed from the communication station and swallowed hard. 2,000 ground contacts at least. Maybe more landing behind them. They're spreading in a full ring around the Vrain positions. Torvin looked out over the battlefield and saw dark shapes moving with terrible speed between the burning craters. Smaller than Vrain. Smaller than most of the species in this sector, in fact. But there was nothing small about the way they entered battle. No hesitation. No confusion. No clustering near the pods for safety. They came out already fighting, already organizing, already turning chaos into shape. Inside one of the falling pods moments before impact, Commander Jake Morrison sat strapped into his crash harness and listened to the screaming of atmospheric entry vibrate through the hull. The metal around him groaned from heat. Warning lights pulsed red across his visor. Every drop felt the same at this stage, too fast, too loud, too late to reconsider any life decision that had led here. He had made 43 combat insertions in 15 years. He still hated the ride down every single time. Around him, on linked channels, the rest of the company breathed through the last seconds in practiced silence. Then Jake keyed the squad frequency. "Listen up. We've got 3,000 civilians trapped inside that fortress. They've held for 37 days after the rest of the galaxy wrote them off." His voice stayed level but not soft. 37 days. That means they didn't quit. So neither do we. A few short acknowledgements came back through the static. Lieutenant Amy Chen's voice was one of them. "Calm as ever. Copy that." Sergeant Danny Price sounded almost cheerful. "About time somebody got here." Jake allowed himself the shadow of a grin. Fear existed in every Marine on that channel. Good soldiers never lost fear completely. They just learned how to give it a smaller seat at the table. 15,000 Vrain on the ground, he continued. Armor, artillery, entrenched positions. We are outnumbered. Danny answered first. "Just the way you like it, sir?" A ripple of laughter went across the net, brief, real, useful. Jake let it live for 1 second then cut back in. "Mission remains the same. Hit hard. Split their siege lines. Open a corridor to the fortress. Secure civilians. Push hostile ground forces away from the extraction zone. Rules are simple. Anyone shooting at colonists dies. Anyone surrendering gets processed if we can do it without risking civilians. We are here to save lives, not count trophies." The pod jolted violently. 10 seconds, the drop computer announced. Jake flexed his gloved hands once. Across his HUD, friendly markers bloomed as hundreds of pods descended with his. Company arcs. Squad positions. Predicted impact spread. Orbit had gone better than expected. Ground would be uglier. Ground was always uglier. Below, Vrain troops began scrambling into defensive positions as the real shape of the landing hit them. Heavy weapons swung upward. Anti-air batteries tried to track targets descending too fast and too irregularly to lock cleanly. Officers screamed orders into local command nets already breaking under surprise and debris. Commander Throws, watching from his field station, felt something close around his chest for the first time in years. This was not a rescue fleet throwing a warning. This was an invasion of his battlefield. "Kill them as they land," he snarled. "All units. Concentrate fire on the pods. Break them before they form lines." Too late. Jake's pod slammed into Kelrath with enough force to rattle his teeth. Explosive bolts fired. The front plate blew outward into dust and smoke. He released the harness, stepped into a burning crater, and saw the battlefield open around him in flashes of muzzle fire and silhouettes. Marines were emerging from nearby pods in tight formation. Vrain warriors were charging through the smoke. Jake raised his rifle. Second squad left flank. Third squad secure the ridge. Fourth with me, he snapped into comms. We clear a path to that fortress now. And then Earth met the siege line face to face. The Vrain had expected panic. What hit them instead was coordination so fast it felt unnatural. Jake moved through smoke, shattered rock, and burning pod metal with his rifle braced tight against his shoulder, firing in controlled bursts as Marine squads spread around him like a living machine. Nothing about the landing zone looked organized to an outsider. Craters, dust clouds, screaming metal, enemy armor pivoting into position. But inside the human comm net, every motion had shape. Squad 2 had the left rise. Squad 3 was locking down the broken ridge. Amy Chen's people were already cutting through a Vrain heavy weapon nest that had only just finished deploying. Danny Price was dragging a launcher into position while laughing like the battlefield had personally offended him. A Vrain warrior burst through the smoke on Jake's right, towering above him with 4 arms and a blade longer than a human body. The creature swung low and fast. Jake stepped inside the arc instead of away from it, letting the strike pass behind his back by inches, then planted 3 rounds center mass and 1 through the throat seal. The Vrain collapsed hard enough to shake the dirt. Contact front, Amy called over comms. More incoming. They're regrouping. I see them, Jake answered. The enemy had recovered from the initial shock and were beginning to behave like professionals again. That made them more dangerous but not more impressive. Vrain troops formed firing blocks between wrecked siege guns and armored carriers, trying to pin the Marines in the open before they could reach the fortress. Their officers pushed them hard, screaming orders, driving them forward with fear of punishment stronger than fear of death. Jake saw the difference immediately. The Vrain were fighting because a commander was behind them. His Marines were fighting because civilians were ahead of them. That difference changed everything. Suppress that center line, Jake ordered. Keep them looking at us. Amy, can you break right and get their support crews? Already moving. Her squad peeled away through drifting dust with frightening precision, using crater edges and shattered artillery housings for cover. Jake caught glimpses of them only in fragments, dark armor, short bursts, bodies dropping exactly where resistance thickened most. Amy never wasted motion. She fought like she had already solved the next 30 seconds before the enemy even realized they were in it. On the far side of the landing zone, Sergeant Danny Price knelt behind a broken pod hull and sighted his launcher at a Vrain plasma tank climbing onto a low rise. The tank's turret glowed blue-white as it charged. Sir, Danny said over comms almost casually, I am about to fix a problem. Be quick, Jake replied. Danny fired. The rocket streaked across the battlefield and hit the tank just below its sensor cluster. The explosion ripped half the turret away and sent molten armor spraying across nearby infantry. Marines cheered over the net for half a breath before Jake cut in again. Save it for later. Push. They surged forward. The battlefield folded around their momentum. Every time a Marine paused to reload, another stepped into the angle and fired. Every time one squad hit resistance, another hammered the flank that resistance depended on. They moved like separate people bound by one shared nervous system. Vrain soldiers died not because humans were stronger, but because humans made war feel unfair. Up on the fortress wall, Elder Torvin watched the gray-armored strangers carve through the siege and understood, dimly, that the stories the galaxy told itself about power had missed something vital. These warriors were smaller than the Vrain. Their limbs were fewer. Their faces lacked natural weapons. Yet wherever they went, the battlefield bent around them. Not through brute force. Through discipline. Through speed. Through a terrifying refusal to lose focus once purpose had taken hold. Who are they? Zalith whispered again. Torvin did not answer because a better question had begun to haunt him. What kind of world creates people like this? Below, Jake reached the low hill overlooking the fortress and finally got a full view of the old walls. The blue shield shimmered weakly, barely alive, but still standing. Beyond it he could make out figures pressed against broken stone, watching with the stunned stillness of people afraid rescue might vanish if they breathed too hard. He keyed the command net. All units, visual on the fortress. Shields are moments from failure. We do not let the Vrain reach those gates first. Lieutenant Kevin Ross answered from the east. Heavy resistance, but we are closing. Lieutenant Helen Grant came in a second later. West side is soft. I can reach the entrance. Jake looked at the map flickering across his visor. A circle was tightening around the Vrain positions exactly as planned. For the first time since impact, he let himself believe the corridor could actually happen. Then the fortress shield failed. Blue light flashed once. And died. All across the plains, the Vrain saw the opening at the same exact moment. The shield vanished with a flash so bright the entire battlefield seemed to freeze around it. For 37 days that failing blue barrier had been the thin line between Calrath and slaughter. Now it was gone. No shimmer. No second layer. No miracle. Just broken walls, an open gate, and 3,000 exhausted civilians suddenly exposed beneath a sky still burning with war. The Vrain reacted first. A roar went up across their lines as officers screamed for the final push. Siege troops that had spent weeks waiting for the fortress to open now charged with renewed fury, desperate to turn a collapsing battle into one last atrocity before the humans sealed it from them. Plasma rounds streaked toward the entrance. Infantry surged through smoke and debris. If they reached the gate before the Marines locked it down, the rescue would turn into a massacre in seconds. Jake saw the danger instantly. All units, full advance, he barked. Forget clean lines. Break them now. Nothing gets through to those civilians. He did not wait for acknowledgement. He sprinted down the slope toward the fortress with 4th Squad at his back, firing on the move as Vrain soldiers poured through the drifting dust ahead. A plasma burst scorched past his helmet and turned stone beside him into a spray of molten shards. He ignored it, dropped to one knee behind a shattered artillery mount, fired 3 fast shots into a charging Vrain officer, then rose and kept moving before the body hit the ground. To his left, Amy Chen's squad slammed into the enemy flank like a blade driven under armor. She moved through the chaos with terrifying economy, calling targets, redirecting fire, breaking the Vrain's shape faster than they could rebuild it. One heavy crew tried to swing a plasma cannon toward the gate. Amy shot the gunner through the visor, pivoted, and put 2 more rounds into the loader before his hands even left the weapon controls. Cannon neutralized, she said. Good, Jake answered. Keep cutting. On the eastern approach, Kevin Ross's people hit the Vrain line at a dead run, using smoke grenades and overlapping fire to blind defenders long enough to punch a hole straight through them. On the west, Helen Grant's squad was already near the entrance, hammering anyone who got within killing distance of the opening. The battle no longer looked like a circle. It looked like converging human will. Inside the fortress, panic almost broke the colonists when the shield failed. Mothers pulled children back into the caves. Guards lifted old rifles with shaking hands. Some of them were brave enough to step forward even knowing they would die in seconds if the Vrain reached the breach. Elder Torvin stood at the entrance with Captain Zalith and felt the weight of that choice settle over everyone at once. Fight and die here. Run deeper and die later. Then gray-armored figures burst through the smoke outside the gate, not as invaders but as a wall moving the right direction. Human Marines. They fired outward, not inward. Toward the Vrain. Toward the siege. Toward death itself, as if death had chosen the wrong side and needed correcting. Danny Price reached the barricades first. Charges set, he growled into comms. The Vrain had piled wreckage, armor plating, and collapsed gun carriages across the outer approach to slow any breakout from the fortress. Danny planted explosives on the heap with the affection of a man solving a familiar problem. A second later the barricade blew apart in a burst of flame and twisted metal, opening a clear path from the gate to the Marine advance. Path is clear, he shouted. Jake hit the entrance moments later, breathing hard, armor streaked with ash and dirt. Behind him, Marines spread into a defensive arc, rifles up, covering every approach while more drop pods thundered down in the distance with reinforcements. He looked through the open gate and saw the faces staring back at him. Not soldiers. Not fighters. People. Thin. Dust-covered. Hurt. Terrified in the specific way only abandoned people become terrified. Strange faces by any Earth standard, different eyes, different skin, different shapes of fear, but none of that mattered. Jake saw the same thing he always saw when rescue finally broke through. The look people had when they were not sure hope was allowed to be real. He removed his helmet so they could see him clearly. I am Commander Jake Morrison, he said, his translator carrying the words into the fortress. We are from Earth. We heard your distress call. We are here to help. An old figure stepped forward on trembling legs, tears already running down his face. You came, Elder Torvin whispered. They said no one would come. Jake felt something tighten painfully in his throat, but his voice stayed steady. We came, he said. And we are not leaving until your people are safe. Behind him, the sound of battle continued. But its meaning had changed. Relief came first. Then the shaking started. Once the gate was secure and the first line of Marines locked down the perimeter, the strength went out of Calrath's people all at once. Colonists who had survived 37 days on ration dust and fear began collapsing where they stood, not from fresh wounds, but because the body has its own ideas about when it is finally allowed to stop pretending. Children clung to parents. Parents clung to walls. Old miners sat hard on the stone floor with blank eyes, as if they did not trust their legs anymore. Some laughed. Some cried. Some could do both at the same time. Jake turned from the entrance and keyed the command channel. Medical teams to the gate now. Triage outside the fortress. Kevin, lock the outer perimeter. Helen, rotate your people east and keep pressure on any Vrain trying to regroup. Anyone surrendering gets processed if it doesn't compromise civilian safety. Anyone firing dies. Acknowledgements came back in quick bursts. The Marines moved without wasted motion. A defensive ring formed around the gate and spread outward meter by meter. More human troops arrived from fresh landing pods and took over sectors already cleared by the first wave. In orbit, the last organized Vrain resistance was being dismantled ship by ship. On the plains below, what remained of the siege force was no longer an army. It was fragments trying to remember what confidence had felt like an hour earlier. Lisa Grant reached the triage zone at a run, medical packs slamming against her back. She had seen war before. Blood, burns, amputations, trauma so fresh it still looked surprised. But the thing that hit her hardest when she crossed into the stream of evacuees was not violence. It was neglect, starvation, dehydration. Infections left to worsen because there had been no medicine to spend. Bodies that had not been broken in one dramatic moment, but worn down by waiting for a rescue the galaxy had already decided not to send. She dropped beside a child with soft blue fur and 6 thin legs, one of them wrapped in dirty cloth gone stiff with old blood. "Hey," Lisa said gently as her translator rendered the word. "My name is Lisa. I'm going to help you, okay?" The child stared up at her with exhausted confusion, then gave a tiny nod. Lisa unwrapped the leg and saw the infection immediately. Angry tissue. Fever heat. Too close to turning fatal if left another day or two. She called for antibiotics, irrigated the wound, and began cleaning it with careful hands while the child's mother hovered nearby, shaking so hard she could barely stand. "Will my baby live?" the mother asked. Lisa looked up, made sure her face stayed calm, and answered with the only kind of certainty that mattered in moments like this. "Yes. This is bad, but it's treatable. Your baby is going to be okay." The mother collapsed to her knees and sobbed into both forearms. Lisa had heard gratitude in 100 languages before. It always sounded the same when it was real. Nearby, Elder Torvin made his way through the crowd toward Jake with Captain Zaleth supporting one side of his weight. The old leader looked smaller now that the wall was no longer under him. Smaller and somehow more dignified for it. His people no longer needed him to stand above them. They needed him alive. Jake lifted his visor as they approached. "I am Elder Torvin," the old colonist said, each word dragged up through exhaustion. "Leader of Kelrath. I need to understand. How many of you came?" "About 2,000 Marines on the ground," Jake replied. 20 ships in orbit. More support already inbound. Torvin stared at him. 2,000, he repeated softly. Against 15,000 Vrain. Jake gave a brief, humorless smile. Numbers help. They're just not the only thing that matters. Another explosion echoed somewhere beyond the perimeter. Torvin flinched. Jake did not even turn his head. He trusted his people to handle what was behind him because everything in front of him mattered more right now. "We have nothing to offer you," Torvin said. "No wealth, no rare technology, no strategic position worth this cost. We cannot repay what you have done." Jake's expression sharpened, not with anger but with something quieter. "We did not come for payment, Elder Torvin. We came because you called for help and no one answered. That was enough." Captain Zaleth studied him in open disbelief. "Why would you risk your lives for strangers?" Jake looked past them at the colonists receiving water, food, bandages, and warmth from people they had never met before. "Because where I come from," he said, "if people are in trouble and you can help, then you help. It doesn't matter if they're your neighbors or strangers across the stars." Behind him, Amy Chin jogged in from the perimeter, armor scorched and rifle hanging low. "Commander," she said, "the Vrain are breaking. Their surviving ships are trying to retreat." Jake nodded once. "Let the ones running run. Any ship that turns back or fires gets destroyed. Any ground troops surrendering get taken alive if we can do it safely." Torvin stared at him. "You would spare them," he said, "after what they did here?" Jake met his eyes. "My first job is saving your people," he said. "Not feeding rage." And in that moment Torvin understood that the most frightening thing about humans was not how hard they fought. It was how much strength they still held back. 3 days after the battle, Kelrath no longer looked like a world waiting to die. The broken walls still carried scorch marks. The plains beyond the fortress were still scarred by craters, burned armor, and the dark remains of siege machines that would never threaten anyone again. But life had returned with a force that felt almost defiant. Human engineers worked beside Kelrath miners to restore power lines and water systems. Medical tents stood where Vrain artillery had once waited for the final order to kill. Children who had hidden in caves now played in open streets beneath a sky full of Earth ships holding silent watch. Elder Torvin walked through his colony slowly, as if speed might disturb the miracle. Everywhere he looked, he saw proof that the rescue had not been a passing act of violence, not a battle won and abandoned. Humans were still here, fixing things, feeding people, training guards, rebuilding generators, carrying crates, listening. They had not crossed the stars merely to strike the Vrain. They had come to make sure Calrath could stand after the war ended. That changed the shape of gratitude into something heavier. It became trust. Captain Ryan Cooper had come down from the carrier Valiant that morning. He moved through the colony with Commander Jake Morrison, checking repair reports, supply counts, and defense layouts while colonists paused in their work just to watch them pass. Some still looked at the humans with disbelief, as if the right angle of sunlight might reveal the whole thing had been a hallucination born from exhaustion. Others had moved beyond disbelief into something more durable. Reverence, perhaps. Not for power alone. For power that had chosen mercy. At the rebuilt command center, Amy Chin stood over a tactical map with Captain Zalith and showed him how overlapping fields of fire could turn a weak perimeter into a killing ground for any army reckless enough to test it. Earth had brought modern sensors, shield generators, and weapons, but the greater gift was method. Human defense did not depend on heroics. It depended on preparation, discipline, and the refusal to leave blind spots where innocent people could die. "You're not an easy target anymore," Amy told him. Zalith studied the map and thought of the 37 days before Earth arrived, when survival had felt like a slow apology to death. "No," he said quietly. "We are not." At nearly the same moment, a transmission came in from the Galactic Council. The command center grew still as Counselor Varric's hologram formed above the projector, cold and elegant and utterly unchanged by Calrath's suffering. He spoke first to Captain Cooper, demanding explanation, demanding authority, demanding that Earth recognize the political complexity of a region where the weak had been abandoned because rescue was inconvenient. Jake listened for less than a minute before stepping forward. "Calrath called for help," he said. "You told them they weren't worth the cost." Varric's expression did not change. "The Council must prioritize resources rationally." Jake's voice remained calm, which made the words hit harder. "Then your priorities are rotten." The hologram shifted toward him with the offended stiffness of old power being challenged by something it had not prepared to respect. Varric warned of treaties, retaliation, enemies, consequences. Cooper answered with the steadiness of a man who had already made peace with all of that. "We are not leaving," he said. "We will protect this world until it stands secure. And if other distress calls come, we will answer those too." The chamber went quiet after the transmission died. Elder Torvin had listened from the corner, every word pressing deeper into him than the battle itself. To fight for strangers was extraordinary. To defy the most powerful political body in the galaxy for them was something else entirely. "You could still go," Torvin told Cooper. "Return home. Be safe." Cooper looked at him for a long moment. "That's not who we are." The word spread beyond Calrath faster than war ever had. Other colonies heard. Worlds under pirate attack. Mining stations held hostage. Settlements too poor, too remote, too politically useless for the Council to care. Their distress calls changed after that. No longer addressed only to the systems that had ignored them. Now a new name was added to the signal. And Earth answered. One colony. Then another. Then 5 more. Human ships arrived. Human marines landed. Human medics healed. Human engineers rebuilt. Everywhere the same message followed the gunfire and the medicine. You called for help. We are here. Months later, worlds that had never mattered to anyone powerful began standing together under a new idea stronger than fear. Not empire. Not tribute. Mutual defense. Shared rescue. A promise that no distress call would be weighed against profit again. The Free Worlds Pact began as rumor, became alliance, then became proof that the old order had not been inevitable after all. 1 year after the rescue, Calrath held a celebration. Torvin stood before a crowd of humans and aliens mixed together so naturally that the image alone would have offended half the old galaxy. He spoke of the siege, of the silence that had followed their call, of the moment warriors fell from the sky. He pointed to Jake in the crowd and thanked him, but even as the cheering rose, Jake's eyes drifted past the stage, toward the children, toward the rebuilt streets, toward the night above Calrath, where Earth ships stood guard among the stars. Long after the applause faded, that was the image that remained. Not victory. A world still alive because someone, somewhere, had decided one forgotten distress call mattered.